Hey guys, Lester the Skeptic Tank here once again. I'm here to follow up on the conversation about what to cover next. Appreciate the requests, and it does narrow the scope of what I try to provide. So I'm going to do the best I can. Multi-library, as discussed in my most recent video, which was the reformatted version of the Torx install. So let's see if I can bring that window up appropriately, or at least, okay, I've got Slack builds, and you saw a snapshot of my command line. It's in the super user logged in already. I need to go to Alien Bob. Alien Bob has been a go-to for me because he provides a lot of info, he does a lot of beta testing, and he also provides packages if for any reason you want to go the hard route, like I said in my last major Linux video describing why I go with Slackware, and this is where the community aspect comes in. So I'm just going to use Alien Bob multilib. Hopefully the page is still up. It's been a while. And here it is, at least the instructions. And what we'll do is get the, okay. Again, like I mentioned, this is all about following instructions. So I'm going to try to keep the windows side by side. And the only downside with KDE and window snapping or lack thereof, at least when I have to give credit where credit is due, and Windows 11 does a decent job of window tiling, or however you want to describe the features now, because they give certain window format options. I very much appreciate that. It's more up front in Windows 11. That's all good and well. It's always a matter of what works on the front end versus what is going on in the back end. Part of me appreciates still using Linux because of that. Again, I will give credit to Windows when it's due. Same thing with Mac or any other system if I decide to venture outside of the big three. I had that same old coworker talking about System D. He had spent time, I don't know if he's still spending time in FreeBSD. That's another popular Unix derivative. I don't know if I'm being fair by saying derivative, but I will say that I'm always open to being corrected when needed when it comes to things I'm not too familiar with, like FreeBSD. So with that, I'm going to try to use these commands I'm going to use that, and I'm going to try to paste. And because I'm going to see if this flies, it does not. Okay. I'm going to try that and see, because the thing is, I'm pretty sure, because of how particular the commands have to be. I'm going to close out of this and then just... And I'm going to probably take out the apostrophe. I think that's what's creating that return caret. There it goes. Ah. Mirror not found. Okay. I think there is... Alien Bob. All right. Well, that's the main thing is I don't know when this was pushed out as far, but it looks pretty okay. I'm going to go into 15 and I'm going to see if I can. Okay, so it does point to these files. And I think for me, what I ended up doing was pretty much downloading these files individually. I'll probably get back to you on that upon further research, because it's been a while since I've enabled multilib. So I'll see what I got to do after that, just to make sure I have a pretty smooth process one can follow. Because like I said, I'm not the Linux expert. That I apologize if it came off that way. Yes, I've used it for a long time, but one of the things is once I became functional, I kind of knew what I needed from Slackware or from Linux in general. And if I needed to figure something out, because of the years having been passed over time, since I came across Linux back in the late 90s, maybe around the cusp of 2000, and my operating system of choice was Windows 2000, because of all that time elapsing, a lot of information has been floating around the internet, and so it's been easy to find a lot of information about how do you address a certain error and all that. I just needed to know the answers as long as I knew what I need to ask specifically. So there's that. As the saying goes, use it or lose it. I haven't had to enable my multilib or deal with that for almost 2 years, so I will get back to you and then go from there. All right. Hope to see you again, fellow skeptics. Signing off for now. Hey guys, just found the error of my ways. Something seems to be happening when I try to paste something from like a web page. So as the instructions say, you would put in that FTP command. You have to have that type as is, and if you recall, there was a highlight surrounding the text I did paste. So the apostrophes have to be at both ends. So as you're seeing, it is getting files so far. And it is getting files information. So it's apparently waiting for a response. We'll see if it actually gets me anywhere. So far, I'm waiting, and then I'll probably get back to you after that. Let's see here. Yep, still waiting for a response. All right, I'll check back with anything that would show me signs of progress. All right, well, looks like There has been progress made, so it's, I think so, because it was looking for other things. Let's see. It was showing some other files and things like that. So I am going to open another tab. I'm going to get out of that and see what I've done. I'm in desktop, so it'll be interesting to see what happens at the end when everything is downloaded. Alright, I'll get back to you once again. Okay, so as I was saying, still movement, and it's going to be quite a bit because we are going to be downloading. We're going to be downloading a good chunk of data, and this is about, I think, an entire DVD's worth, because we're downloading a set of files and then the original source CD for 15.0, and again, I'm going to be going by the numbers at the end of the day once these are done. And you're seeing, hopefully you're seeing all the files being procured during this process. All right. Like I said, I've been saying, I'll get back to you as soon as everything's done. Hopefully I'll go in and be able to follow these by the numbers, so that way I can show that I've enabled multilib support. And again, this is in the case for things like Steam. You can't launch Steam. I don't think there's a 64-bit iteration. But I remember when I ran through Slack builds, I needed multilib support to download that specific package. All right, I'll be back soon, hopefully, and then go from there. All right, looks like we are done. I didn't get an error from the looks of it. So the next thing, all right? So I've got the stuff, and now I need to change into the directory. And from here, it will, I'm going to go 16, CD 15.0. Let's see if I did this right. I'm in. Now, I'm going to run the command. I hope you can read the item on the left with all the steps. So I'm going to do upgrade package. It helps to get to the point where I can complete that. And like I've demonstrated with the Torx installation, I'm going to go install new and just do as directed. And this is what I appreciate. It's sometimes it takes years of time for the legacy to be built, meaning the tradition developing over time within the Slackware community, and it enables us to be bold and try to take our shots and explore Slackware. Whereas in the 2000s, no fault of the community, it's just that all the information that we've gathered over 20 years worth of time, that will hopefully raise the floor of Linux users, and I would like to think that's been the case for myself, because I just needed certain things so I can get on the ground running. So I'm going to go by the numbers as I said, and this is the next thing I'm going to run, okay? There it goes. So I'm going to let this do its thing. And see, it's already telling me there are things already installed. So it looks like, yeah, there might have been things affecting my multilib experience. So apparently I've got a lot of installed. And now according to these, you are now going to install 32-bit compatibility packages to support all the 32 programs you want to run. So according to this, the next command I have to run is, or I should say the next variable I should introduce to the install new. Apologies about that. So the next thing I want to try, the next part of the command, is the one you see on the left, right? Install new Slackware, and this assumes this directory, because when you're seeing that, right? So I can now, and it looks like a dash pat 32, and then anything that's inside, just like I did with the previous parameters. I believe I got that in correctly. All right. And as you're already seeing with the other process, I have some things already installed, and then if they find something not installed, they will go ahead and replace it or at least install it. So there's that. So that's one thing I appreciate about Linux, my experience with updating things. It's just, hey. So the last thing is, according to the guide, is rebooting the machine. And part of this will come into play how I handle my kernel updates. Probably not kosher, because I have a workaround. I discovered it recently. But that, because the kernel gets updated and every distro is different when it comes to that. Sometimes, though, as soon as one is released, push it. Volkerding and company are different about that. When it comes to when a new kernel is released, they want to make sure it's ready to be pushed to the users. So there we go. And once it's done, and I have the opportunity to reboot, I'll probably snap a camera action, and then first, because I had done some kernel upgrades, I haven't recompiled my kernel to point to the new stuff I downloaded. So I'll show you the workaround as soon as I have the opportunity to reboot. All right, thanks again. I hope to get back to you, kind of complete the experience. I'll see you then. Hello, fellow skeptics. I just rebooted my machine, just as I was expected to do once I've updated to multilib support. In the meantime, before I try to do my first testing of the multilib, I'm going to log into the super user on my command line. Yep, see? I'm going to try that again. There we are. I'm going to do a good Slack package update for good measure, just to see. And as I mentioned previously, if they don't see an update to, if they have the list already up to date, I'm going to say no. I'm going to go Slack package upgrade all, just to see if, with the libraries I've got. As you can see, the additional libraries I've added as multilib. As you can see, I've got a multilib alien I'm going to uncheck anything that references that in the installed section. Any and all. And it looks like outside of all of that, along with this patch that I can just actually hit escape. So I have nothing new. In the meantime, I was also, just to touch upon kernel update preparation, it's been years since I've last done the kernel recompilation process. Like I said, I'm at a point in my Linux life where I don't feel the need to recompile my kernel. I can look up any documentation that has been up to date. With respect to that, if it's still beneficial to recompile the kernel, for me, my system moves fairly well enough, and also I don't see a need to. Like I said, I'll look it up, see if I'm within that whole Linux mindset. But if you are thinking about recompiling your kernel, depending on the main benefit was you wouldn't load as many things or modules into memory. But with today's computing standards, where 16 gigabytes of RAM or more or less the sweet spot. But if you are one of those that wants to keep a clean kernel, I'm going to start with an LSPCI. You can see here my Kate file. I'll go like this. You can see I've already done some prep work, but I'm just going to show the commands I do. LSPCI. This gives me that listing there. I also did mount, which will list things that have been mounted, whether that's devices. And so what you're seeing here, that all these reference points, I hope you can read what's on the left. TMPFS is on this, and it's going to tell you where this is mounted on. You can tell the mount points based on the / and then the dev. This was a major point in why I adopted Linux full time. Learning things like that about how folders and drives are handled and treated. For those who have been using Windows, you're pretty much limited to letters. So the number of letters in the American alphabet. So A through Z. So you have to be very careful about how you go about your drive management. Now, in all seriousness and realism, I find it hard that people will exhaust all 26 letters, but the other side of the argument is, hypothetically, why would you want to limit yourself? Because every device, when you mount it, whether we're talking an external drive, like I have 2 external drives, and then I also have my storage devices. I have 2 drives in a RAID 1 array. I also have 2 NVMe, as well as a solid state drive. I believe I have 4 solid state drives. So having that, and I can section off any way I want. The main reason for partitioning is just as a fallback. And in the event you have to reinstall or reset up your system, you have files that have been partitioned away from the system area where you would put your programs. And the amount of flexibility one has, that the other command I would run as well is I ran my text editor to print out would be my file system table, fstab, and you can tell this is what's launched or what's mounted when I get into my system. And it also tells me what type of partition they are. So I have two swap partitions. I have a home, as well as a CD-ROM. Floppy is just probably the traditional default. I can hold down Control, hit letter X, and I believe there might be one I should put, but I'm going to type in LSUSB. And what I can do with here is point out that these are the devices attached to my machine at the moment. And I'm going to just edit my text file, and I'm just going to paste it. And then I'm just going to save it. This is so that and you can see here the different file system types. You saw ext4. That helps me figure out what things I need to load. And so when I look at mount, it should show me, yes. This one here says ext4. And where's the other one here? Yes. This technically is an NTFS partition that I share between my Windows and my Linux environments. But you can see here, my gaming partition is set up for ext4. So that would tell me I would want to load the NTFS module in the recompilation of my kernel. And I would like to put them run them in kernel at the kernel level instead of the module level. There's a process to do that. So that's kind of the prep work, and especially if you need to know exactly what you have in terms of your devices. And when you do the process, you do have a pretty good categorization when you want to go down to each device section in the kernel module and all that. So I'm going to do that. And for Slackware, you can download your new kernel. As you saw in the listing of that, it was in the form of patches, but you can download kernel headers. You can believe kernel firmware along with the actual kernel source code, where you would see. So if I were to go to user, so I'm going to change my directory user and then source. I'll start there, and then I can do a dir. And I can go into that, and I can just do another dir. And here, this is where you would run your compilation processes. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to take you on a quick journey of, hopefully quick. I'm going to use my menu here. So tempted to call it start menu, but it's pretty much the principle of the start menu. People say, oh, that looks like Windows. Yeah, maybe it does. And a lot of operating systems like Mac, they have like what's called like a storage key. Or at least it ties in with your browser. And I'm going to just do a quick query, Slackware compile kernel. And yeah, you can go to different sources. It says yet another kernel compile guide. And they're just running through a guide, creating kernel configs. So if you really want to build your kernel, and especially when you need to do that in the event of installing something like VirtualBox, and that's something I'll probably do in another video, but this is one guide. What was that? It said enjoy Slackware. Let's see what this traditional, what I would believe to be traditional. So let's see. It gives more of an overview of the kernel and compiling kernel and why to do so. And thank you. Most Slackware users will never need to compile a kernel. The huge and generic kernels contain virtually all the support you will need. Now here's the however. Some users may need to compile a kernel. If your computer contains bleeding edge hardware, a newer kernel may offer improved support. Yep, sometimes a kernel patch may be available that can correct the problem you're experiencing. In these cases, a kernel compile is probably warranted. If you still think compiling a kernel is something you want or need to do. So this looks like one of the more classic guides based on what I'm looking at here, because they're referring to kernel 2.6. We are in kernel 5. You saw what I was. You saw where I was. Let's go back to the. Command line here. 5.15.17. And looks like my wallet manager. This is the password manager, at least for this desktop environment. Oh yeah, I know why. Because most people, especially like myself, because I use pretty similar passwords, but I still vary them up. And it may pop back up if I did it wrong. So that's pretty much in a nutshell. I'm going to try to, looks like, let's see if Steam launched upon login and boot. Doesn't look like it, so I can actually do this, and I can just type in Steam. And it's really interesting because I have my shortcuts for my games already. And this may feed into another video about Linux gaming. I'm going to probably do another guide, because as I explained, some games may require more things. But Steam is a nice little alternative, especially if you feel as though you're running out of space. So I should be able to launch Steam. I'm going to see if this loads. And intriguing, it's in the midst of updating Steam, and I've noticed that whether I'm in Windows or Linux, Steam does do plenty of updating for itself. So cool. At least it's recognizing it, because so if I go to Slack builds, as I mentioned, I'm going to open this in a new tab. As far as Vivaldi, like I said, I came around the funky reason why. If you really want to know why, Every other Chrome variant outside of this has what I like to call this function. Is it so hard for a Chrome variant to include this? Just honest question, because Firefox has had that feature. Even Apple Safari has had that. A Quake con sale. Okay. Either way, I have my library. And it'll tell you whether or not this can be installed in your environment. I haven't installed... Okay. I could technically install this if I wanted to. Both installments, okay. Arma 3. Interesting, I thought I had installed it, but okay. Battle for West North. Does it not recognize my games? Oh well. But going back to Slack builds, let's go back to Slack builds here. At least when it comes to, because in terms of the Linux world, I talked about the fragmentation. A lot of the stuff that's pushed out is for the popular distributions, mainly Ubuntu, and the most common format is the .deb. And it says a multilib installation is required to run Steam on 64-bit Slackware, which I had. That was the deciding factor to finally move from a purely 64-bit Slackware experience to a multi-library, or what they call 6432, for that compatibility. And yes, I know people might hate me for it, but I am running an NVIDIA Quadro, as I explained in my Torx video. But at least when it comes to driver support, NVIDIA has always had the best drivers by reputation. AMD or ATI, before they merged with AMD, not so much. So that's a bit for kernel prep. Looks like my multi-library is still kicking in. I just had to replace the libraries I lost based on what you witnessed in my installation process for the multilib. I had just a handful of files that needed to be updated, because as you witnessed, it skipped a lot of things because there were items already present on my system.